Frankenstein. The very name has become a part of the English language. It summons images of a remote mountaintop castle where a crazed scientist stitches together body parts that he has taken from moonlit graveyards and gibbets. In the castle, strange machinery whirring and buzzing in a gothic parody of a surgical theatre. On the slab, a giant of a man, soon to be brought to life with wild electricity. The story of Frankenstein and the monster he creates is a dark commentary on what it means to be human, told through a compelling blend of horror and science fiction. In fact, some would argue that this is the first true science fiction story. But where did this now familiar tale have its genesis? Like many a story, this one began on a dark and stormy night. It was 1816, and the young Mary Godwin and her lover and eventual husband, Percy Shelley, were visiting Lord Byron at the Villa Diodati in Switzerland. The weather being particularly poor that summer, the group of them spent many of their evenings sat around the villa's log fire, reading old ghost stories. On one such night, Byron proposed that they should each write a ghost story of their own. The days passed, and each morning Mary was forced to admit to the others that she had been unable to come up with a tale to chill their collective bloods. One evening, though, conversation turned to the nature of life. Recent experiments had shown that electricity could animate the dead limbs of a frog, and Mary suggested that perhaps this was a sign of things to come. It was well past midnight when they finally retired to bed, and, unable to sleep, Mary's imagination became possessed by grim terrors. I saw the pale student of unhallowed arts kneeling beside the thing he had put together. I saw the hideous phantasm of a man stretched out, and then, on the working of some powerful engine, show signs of life, and stir with an uneasy, half-vital motion. Frightful must it be, for supremely frightful would be the effect of any human endeavour to mock the stupendous mechanism of the Creator of the world. From its inception that night, the story grew and took form, story element stitched to story element. The monster was born, and our dreams would never be quite the same again. Byron, incidentally, never did produce a finished story. Byron does, however, have another part to play in our story. In the early 1800s, Byron was the star of Regency London. His poetry was receiving high critical acclaim, and he was sought after for every society event. In short, he was the rock star of his day. Unfortunately, he was also getting into deeper and deeper debt, and as matters became ever more serious, Byron began to look for a potential wife amongst the wealthy elite of London. Enter one Annabella Miliband, likely heiress to a rich uncle. Annabella was a stiff, religious woman with strict morals, about as different as one could imagine to the dramatically dark and morally fractured Byron. Unsurprisingly, she rejected his early advances, but eventually he seems to have worn down her resistance, and the two were married in January 1815. It was, however, destined to be a short and unhappy marriage. In the spring of that year, Annabella fell pregnant, but as the money problems continued, Byron turned more and more to drink and was subject to dark, aggressive mood swings. He soon began to take out his anger and hostility on his wife, who was increasingly convinced that he was descending into madness. Heavily pregnant with their child, she feared for their safety, and eventually contacted Byron's half-sister Augusta Lee, who, on her arrival, became the new target for Byron's wrath, leaving Annabella free to give birth in December to their daughter, Augusta, whom they knew from the start as Ada. When Ada was only a month old, Byron and Annabella separated, and a few months later Byron left England, never to return, eventually to die when Ada was only 8 years old. Despite being too young to ever truly know her father, and very much against the wishes of her mother, Ada remained fascinated with Byron for the rest of her life, and on her death she was buried alongside him. So what was life like for the young Ada? Well, her mother Annabella was unsurprisingly somewhat bitter about Byron, and his shadow was to fall across her relationship with Ada, which remained cold and distant. Fortunately for our story, however, Annabella was determined to promote Ada's interest in mathematics and logic, hoping that it would steer her away from the insanity and romantic excesses displayed by her father. Ada proved to be a bright student with a definite flair for mathematics, and, like many mathematicians, she found a certain poetic beauty in the subject. In 1833, the 18-year-old Ada was introduced to Charles Babbage. Babbage was a skilled mathematician, philosopher, inventor, and mechanical engineer, with interests in many fields. Of interest to us, though, is his desire to produce books of tables automatically. Nowadays, if you want to know, say, the cosine of 30 degrees, you simply use a calculator. But back then such things simply did not exist, so people looked up results in books of tables of figures. There were tables for all manner of things, from simple trigonometry to complex actuarial tables predicting how long a person was likely to live. But without modern calculators or computers, how were these tables themselves produced? Well, oddly enough, by calculators. Except in those days, a calculator was a person who sat and worked out tables of results by hand. As the calculations, by their very nature, were repetitive, it is not surprising that the tables contained errors, humans being, well, human. Babbage became convinced that it should be possible to calculate these tables more efficiently and, just as importantly, more accurately. Bringing together his knowledge of mathematics and skill at engineering, he devised a mechanical machine that could be configured to perform many of these types of calculations, and, of course, with greatly improved speed and reliability. He never managed to complete the machine he designed, the difference engine, as he named it, but it was recently built using the techniques available at the time, and works exactly as designed. Babbage had designed the first true computer. It could be configured, programmed, for the task at hand, making it an entirely different creation from, say, a clock. The difference engine fascinated Ada, and she worked closely with Babbage, writing algorithms to convert problems to a form that this new device could process. The work the two of them did was truly groundbreaking and far ahead of its time. Quite reasonably, Babbage is remembered as one of the fathers of computing, and Ada is remembered as the world's first programmer. Our story now moves to the 20th century and the beginning of World War II. The day after Britain joined the war, a young man by the name of Alan Turing turned up for work at Bletchley Park, the home of the British government's Code and Cipher School. Like Babbage before him, Turing had already established himself as a father of computing, having published a series of groundbreaking papers on computing theory, and, like Babbage before him, Turing was fascinated by codes and ciphers. Building on the excellent work done by Polish codebreakers, Turing and his colleagues managed to crack the Enigma and Lorentz ciphers used by the German military. Being able to read German military messages, especially those to and from submarines, is estimated to have shortened the war by between 2 and 4 years, saving countless lives. Of course, like everything else that happened at Bletchley, it was top secret, so Turing's incredible contribution to the war effort was not appreciated until many, many years later. Fortunately, his contribution is now understood, and his name will live on as both a father of computing and as a man of outstanding intellect. If you want to know more about Turing, part of his story is told in the 2014 film, The Imitation Game. I strongly recommend it, not just as an excellent film, but also as a chance to see an engaging performance by Benedict Cumberbatch as the brilliant, eccentric Turing. Before he played Alan Turing, Benedict Cumberbatch had already established himself as a talented actor, probably best known for his television portrayal of a 20th century Sherlock Holmes, a character that Turing would certainly have identified with. In fact, in 2012, the acting profession awarded Benedict one of its most prestigious awards, the Olivier Award for Best Actor. Which rather brings us full circle. You see, the performance that won him this coveted award was his portrayal of a certain scientist, Baron Victor Frankenstein.